Hey, hello, everybody. Welcome to Frost and Filigree Live. Much in the spirit of something I did a few years ago, I read my entire novel, Pilgrim of the Sky, on YouTube and posted it all around the place. And that was kind of fun and cool in honor of the fact that my next novel or my novella, that's the size of a novel, is about to publish, which is the second in the Frost and Filigree series, is coming up in just 2 days on February 21st. I believe it was actually February as well a few years ago, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, maybe, that I read Pilgrim of the Sky. So I thought I would do the same thing here. The good news is with a novella, it means that I have quite a bit more time to get further on in the book, if that makes sense. So each episode is probably going to be about 2 or 3 chapters. And yeah, I was just hoping to have a chance to introduce you to the crew that we have here and do a little bit of fun reading and accents and all that good stuff. So if you come on by and have any questions, I will try to answer them at the end of the broadcast. But I am going to start uh, right in with the beginning. There are two short excerpts of poems and a quote, and then I will start in with the book. So this is Frost and Filigree by Natania Barron. I met a lady in the meads, full beautiful, a fairy's child. Her hair was long, her foot was light, and her eyes were wild. From La Belle Dame Sans Merci by John Keats. She was a Gordian shape of dazzling hue, vermilion spotted, golden, green, and blue, striped like a zebra, freckled like a pard, eyed like a peacock, and all crimson barred, and full of silver moons that, as she breathed, dissolved or brighter shone, or interweaved their lustres with the gloomier tapestries. So rainbow sided, touched with miseries, she seemed at once some penanced lady elf, some demon's mistress, or the demon's self. Lamia by John Keats. You are a woman with a brain and a reasonable ability. Stop whining and find something to do. The Dowager Countess of Grantham. Chapter 1, Lyndhurst. These sorts of stories inevitably begin with a mysterious moment, some great unexpected event. The scene is set, and the narrative begins apace. This story, however, breaks with tradition. It starts with an invitation to a party, a little light gossip, and the promise of new neighbors. Hardly the domain of the supernatural. But do not be put off. There shall be plenty of magic as our tale unfolds. You see, for the two heroines of said tale, the ordinary is the extraordinary. In every way measured against humanity, these women are unusual to the extreme. They possess all the skills expected of women of birth, and are yet not women of birth in the traditional way. They are older, wiser, and stranger than their peers, yet possessed of abilities and persuasions to both delight and terrify. Yet, in the unlikely instance that someone should stumble into their garden, their appearance would not, perhaps, be enough to raise alarm. They sit together across a heavy iron table, positioned behind one of the largest mansions in Tarrytown, New York. Shade is provided by way of an enormous wisteria canopy. The two women sip tea out of delicate cups, with an ivy and rose intertwined pattern, little rivulets of steam rising and eddying. One is tall and lean, her face unmarred by time, yet displaying a visible hunger in her lines. Perhaps it is her fiery eyes, an amber brown hue, or the shocking pale of her skin as it transitions to the full, inky curls about her brow. Either way, she is lovely by many measures, despite the pallor, and she dresses a la mode, down to the scalloping on her heels and the slant of her hat. These days she goes by the name Vivian Dulac. The other woman, Nerissa Melusine Valdemar, is shorter, rounder, with a plainer look to her features. Her eyes could be blue or gray or green, but never in a striking way. Her chin is a bit weak, her brows disrupted by a pair of spectacles. The hair atop her head might once have been arranged well, but now tumbles half-heartedly down one side. Her dress speaks to practicality, limned with mud about the hem, and something dark remains under her fingernails. There are enough clues within these descriptions to give a close observer pause. It is cold, yet the wisteria blooms. As long as women talk, their tea does not get cold. The woman with the tousled appearance wears no shoes, and now and again her grimy toes peek out from beneath the hem of her dress. The substance beneath each silvered moon of her fingernails is certainly blood. From the front, and indeed all other angles of the house, this little garden oasis is invisible, for the world around them is wreathed in winter snow and wind. And yet here, in their little enclave, no frost or flake dare invade. This private garden is for these two friends and them alone. Their mundane tea time, though certainly accentuated by a most vexing magic, is possessed of a deep calm and comfort, the quiet of two women known long to one another. A third figure emerges from the house itself, a manservant of sorts. He is swarthy in appearance, dressed in the custom of a butler, with a long single braid down his neat beard. He is broad of shoulder and light of step, so light in fact that he does not appear to walk so much as he drifts. Yes, where his feet touch the ground is a rather curious blur, a smudge of topaz and light where a pair of shoes ought to be. It is almost enough to be a distraction from the earrings he wears, thick and gold and marvelous, dangling almost to his shoulders. When the man, if he is so, approaches, giving a most regal bow, the pale woman stands. Barkan, she says, Nerissa and I were just discussing our new neighbors. Have they yet called? Barkan comes up from his bow and says, No, Lady Dulac. I've only now just received the post, and while the Villiers have sent a most impressive invitation, the rest is sadly bereft of communication from the Rockefellers. I told you they wouldn't call, Nerissa said, pushing up her spectacles with one hand and peering down at her dirty foot as if to examine it. She frowns at what she sees and then straightens, taking in Barkan's figure. And you're not even trying to conceal yourself. It's shameful. Barkan raises a neat brow and presents the letters to Lady Dulac. She does not, as is his habit, entertain Nerissa's admonishment. He doesn't have to conceal when he's out here with us, Lady Dulac says sweetly, taking the proffered letters and rifling through them quickly. It's the least we can do considering he's continued indenture against his will. You seem to have plenty of use for him, Nerissa says. That's only because I can't seem to break the bond. You know how I find slavery abhorrent, replies Vivian, clicking her tongue. You promised me you'd find answers. Well, it isn't as if I don't have other work to do. Every time I bring it up, you seem to have another reason we need to keep him around. It would be foolish to send him out to pasture while we still figure all of this out. I'm still here, Barkan says dryly. You're always here. That's the problem, Nerissa says, pushing away from the table. Her manner is like a farmhand getting up from the milking cows. I've got to go visit the goats, she says to Lady Dulac. Viv, make sure you don't get that warm holiday greetings get to your head. You promised one single party. That is all. Vivian stands across from Nerissa, clutching the invitations close to her chest. Other than a twitching finger, she is a figure of ice and snow. The intricate lace on her shoulders almost fades into her skin, looking more like fey tattoos than clothing. You are not allowed to tell me what to do, Vivian says. Nerissa laughs as she passes Barkan. Of course I'm allowed. You just don't ever listen. A faint flush of red creeps upon Vivian's cheeks. It does not make her look healthy. It makes her look monstrous, especially the way it accentuates her strange eyes. We agreed on 2 parties this year. That was last year. We've progressed firmly into 1911, Nerissa says, as she retreats up the steps to the long porch, one of her servants opening the way for her, or else just enough through the power of the enchanted door. You're getting forgetful in your old age, my dear. But I have 3 dresses already, Vivian whines. It's a piteous sound. 1 party. Choose well, Nerissa replies. She does not look back to see Vivian glaring at her, but knows full well the look. Before the tale goes much deeper, it is essential to understand a few important things about Vivian and Nerissa. As far as either of them knows, they are immortal. Nerissa is perhaps a century older than Vivian, but neither knows for sure. Those first dark decades of their lives are somewhat clouded with a mutual thirst for blood. It took a long time, many lifetimes in the most literal sense, to rectify that debt. It is far more difficult for Nerissa, who, unlike her friend Vivian, is far less human. But to say either of them is human is a stretch. Is a serpent any less a rock than a wolf? No, of course not. A human being may very well be defined by their extremely limited existences and their uncanny ability to tease out art and meaning in such a short span. Neither Vivian nor Nerissa think much like human beings, though one might say that over the years they've gone a bit human ish. Especially Vivian, who has always been drawn to people and their lives and rules. It gives her the illusion of warmth in her state of perpetual permafrost, as Nerissa is fond of calling it. Vivian is not the only one of her kind, but one of a dying race. Many have heard of the Fae or the Fates, and she is certainly related to both of them. Most properly, she is a night sylph. In her youth, she was known for wooing men and then driving them mad once they discovered she was not, in fact, human. This is very traumatic for men, especially those in the age of chivalry for whom powerful women were ever a source of terror. It isn't her nature to fall in love, however, and while she has learned some ways to curb her most deadly tendencies, it is not unheard of for her to fall off the proverbial wagon now and again. Nerissa, meanwhile, is more reptile than human being. However, she is able to change her appearance to suit any will. Most of the time, she looks as she does now, a barefooted and rather untidy woman of middling age who would be more at home in a library than a vast manse like their current residence, which Vivian calls the Joyous Guard. Nerissa finds the name ridiculous, as most of Vivian's human obsessions. She has yet to get over the fact that she could not woo Launcelot from Guinevere and has named the place in his honor. The manse is called Knoll properly, or else Lyndhurst, and it is a fine enough name. In specific terms, Nerissa is a lamia. Unlike Vivian, she is the last of her kind. This is owed to the fact that most were killed during the previous century, often mistaken for vampires during the last purge. It was due to Vivian's social connections and Nerissa's own reformed behavior, no longer subsisting on human blood and instead turning to her flock of goats, that she was glossed over. Lamias are far more trusting of mankind, or at least they were before the purge, so they came to a most gruesome end. Now that the world has turned, another century passed, and the Americas established beyond a backwater trading post, Vivian and Nerissa, after long centuries in England, Russia, China, and Japan, came at last to New York itself. Finding the rush of such a place a bit too much to handle and their fortune better suited elsewhere, they relocated upstate to a town on the Hudson called Tarrytown, on the suggestion of a friend called Gould, who happened to be enduring a most horrendous divorce. Rather than stay in her family's abode, she hired her friend Vivian to keep after the place herself. Miss Gould doubtfully knew the true nature of Miss Dulac and Miss Valdemar, but, as so many before her, she found Vivian near impossible to argue with. And given the option to live in a Gothic manse, Vivian spared no effort. Much of Nerissa's work, however, is tied up in the business of maintaining such a property, though it never will be hers entirely. A strange side effect of her kind is the incapability of ever owning land or property. Vivian is all dreams and delights, while Nerissa is habitually left with the dregs. It had been Vivian's idea to build the, quote, painted garden, as she calls it, a kind of mirror to the Fey realm between the walls of Lyndhurst itself, a memory of the lives they both lived, giving up their native world for this. Both have ever been creatures of both worlds, but the Fey realm is far behind the times of fashion and sadly lacking in blood nourishment. As Nerissa walks the long corridors of the ridiculously large mansion, it is honestly one of the most befuddling and insulting recreations of the Gothic she has ever seen. She thinks about the goats and about her distaste for the genie Vivian has masquerading as a manservant. It's a touch too precious, she thinks, and invariably a giveaway. He does not like doing what he's told and often lets things slip under the guise. It's happened before their discovery, and it's never ended well. The agreement is to stay on at Lyndhurst for at least 5 years, and while only one has passed, it has felt like an eternity. The socialites of Tarrytown and its surrounding cozy towns are nothing if they aren't insistent on parties and soirees and galas and events, all of which disgust Nerissa. Human food makes Nerissa downright ill, especially fruit. To her, they always smell half rotted. Why anyone would want to stuff slimy seed pods down their gullet is beyond her, but Vivian absolutely adores human food. It doesn't make a difference whether or not she eats it, as her energy is simply gained by being around people, a kind of latent vampirism that does little harm in small doses but can be deadly in large. Nerissa has no such luck. She knows she's cranky because she hasn't had much in the way of food, but in this forsaken place, it takes so long to make the trip from the garden to the pastures. The groundskeepers now know to leave Nerissa alone to the goats, and she picks times when she knows they won't be around. The younger one, Jim, has been looking at her a little oddly lately, but most of the servants simply discuss her as being the eccentric sister, when it's plain to see for anyone with a pair of eyes that the two mistresses of the house are not related. Still, Nerissa feels her worry lessen slightly as she approaches the flock. She consented to a pair of boots on her way out, but as soon as she nears the paddock, she shirks them off and climbs the gate and sits among the goats for a bit as they paw around her. Despite her frequent feedings, they are not afraid of her. She doesn't kill them after all, and based on skills learned while in Africa, she knows how to bleed them with minimal pain and maximum harvesting. She only feeds off the females, of course. The rams are too aggressive and kept in another pasture, their blood muddied when unsavory to her palate. Today it's Millie's turn to give the gift of nourishment to Nerissa. The ewe is 2 years old by now, Nerissa reckons, and full of vigor. She does taste best. Taking Millie by the bell, she walks her to this little stable where she goes about her scientific work, as she's told the staff. She's given explicit instructions to be left alone despite their curious glances. After the first few months, however, and tasting the first slaughter, they did not ask further questions. A fortunate side effect of Marissa's feeding is surprisingly tender and less gamey meat. While no self respecting elite would deign to eat such subpar meat, the servants at Lyndhurst had absolutely no qualms regarding its swift consumption. To feed, however, Nerissa cannot continue the facade of her human form. Practicing magic while absorbing life is almost impossible. One cannot both sneeze and drink at the same time, after all. The goats see her change, but it doesn't appear to unnerve them. Most of them have moved on now that they understand Millie is to be selected. One might say, in their primitive capabilities, they have rallied around the Lamia as followers of some ancient goat deity. But a few remain behind, nibbling weeds at the edge of the shed and peering toward her every now and again. She disrobes and prepares to change, still petting Millie and preparing her. Were a human being to see Nerissa change, as very few have, they would not remain so composed as Millie and her sisters. Her skin shifts in 1,000 little undulations, myriad little plates rising through patterned scales about her face and down her arms. Where there were 2 arms and 2 legs, a most common arrangement for Homo sapiens, there are now 4 arms, each with black claws upon 3 fingers, and a long tail more akin to a dragon or large lizard than a snake. There are some smaller appendages that sprout from the sides under the dress she wears that might prove helpful for some basic locomotion, but judging from the sheer musculature, they are likely unnecessary. Her face and hair shift as well, her eyes going black, not just the color of her eyes, but the sclera as well, and widen to the size of a horse's. Nerissa's hair loses its soft, loose quality, and each individual strain becomes thicker, like limp algae. She is not ugly by Lamia standards, to say the least. Should any number see her, they would compliment the blood red of her teeth and the glistening mucus on her lips and ears and nose. These are desired characteristics, and it is rumored in their heyday many went to great lengths to appear such a way, supporting a small cosmetics industry in ancient Greece. But to Nerissa, who has known so few of her own kind, she sees her own hands, all 4 of them, and shudders. The talons, the scales, these are elements of her body she has grown ashamed of over the centuries. Humankind fears these things, those of cold blood, those of rough skin. Though she can shift into any imaginable shape and has lived the life of men and women a dozen times over, she must always be this way to feed. She must always face her true self in all its sticky, inhuman glory. The talons are, at least, ideal for extraction. There is that one vein, common in many domesticated creatures. The Maasai use an arrow. Nerissa uses her talon to puncture the vein and drain the blood. By the time this happens, Millie is in a daze. Nerissa suspects it's her eyes. In the dark, her own are similar to the goats, curiously shaped hourglasses just faintly darker than the black around them. Perhaps goats see it too. When at last Nerissa emerges from the shed, having made sure that Millie is sufficiently recovered, she is back to the guise she wears most days. This is as human as she gets. She chooses the details of eccentricity, not because she must, but because it helps her get into character. It also means she's forgiven for avoiding some of the trappings of her sex shoes, extensive petticoats, that sort of thing, and can be excused when she lapses. Now that she's sated, however, she realizes how awful she's been to Vivian. This is what happens when she waits too long to feed. Ideally, she would feed every day, but now she stretches out her feedings to thrice weekly, making sure to feed strategically. When she was younger and far more active, the food was a necessity. But this soft life of dinner parties and gardening does not quite require such gluttony. Yet it had been getting more difficult to maintain the abbreviated eating schedule. Goats are not as nutritious as humans, even with the special diet she has developed for them. And she must rotate through the herd to get ample feeding. In the back of her mind, she begins to worry that she may need to consider a new kind of beast. Goats are easy, but she doubts something larger like a cow would be so manageable. Going through two goats a sitting would be difficult, but so would changing the arrangement with Lyndhurst. Nerissa is so engrossed with her thoughts that she does not notice the shadowy figure emerge from the side of the shed. The figure is slight, cloaked, and swiftly moving. When Nerissa turns slightly to check on Millie one last time, the figure is gone. And while she senses an odd shift in the air, she thinks little of it, instead, simply keeping on her way toward the main house to apologize to Vivian. Chapter 2: A Winter's Ball. Vivian spends most of the next week planning for the ball at the Villiers mansion. While they are not her favorite family of note, they do have one of the larger properties and are known to invite a mix of foreign dignitaries, artists, and occasionally a more bohemian sort to their parties. George Villiers, the patriarch of the family, was something of a world traveler in his time, and generally accepted to be a gregarious and generous man with a penchant for making friends in and out of society with his charm. This extends, of course, to those of the gentler sex, for whom he is also generally accepted to have appetite. His wife, Lady Edna Montague Villiers, is that pale, fragile kind of woman so often found in such circles, too concerned about her own diminishing health, much of which can never be corroborated by doctors, but always by palmists and soothsayers, none of whom are authentic, to see what's going on right beneath her own roof. To Vivian, such concepts as fidelity feel very old fashioned. Having lived through a number of court situations in her time and outlived every last one of her mortal lovers, or killed them, same difference, she finds the simultaneous shock and awe of matters between the sheets to be tiresome. No, what truly excites Vivian Dulac about parties is the clothing. Since the first moment she set her eyes upon a human being, she knew in an instant that clothing, that fashion, connected to her to them in a way that none of her sisters did. They are mostly happy to frolic in their natural forms, to wave weeds of water and air, flower and frond. In a rather basic, primitive way, she supposes that is alluring. Sylphs have a reputation for treating nudity as a kind of art. Aside from their paleness, they do look very human indeed, yet suffer none of the unfortunate side effects of aging. So ever curving breasts and unmarred skin make for a good show. But Vivian adores materials, patterns, the play of light on thread. She's quite good at her own handiwork, but has to play down her talents lest she attract too much attention. Her formula for success is simple: find a willing accomplice, typically a relatively little known designer from Paris or the closest city, and strike a deal with them. She provides a healthy stipend and extensive notes, drawings, and schematics for each and every dress. All credit is relinquished, of course, and once they learn from her craft and approach, they are free to use it elsewhere. That said, the week before the ball is a dizzying maelstrom of samples, measurements, and fittings. She's even allowed to dress Nerissa to her extreme distaste because they agree to show a unified front. They can't endure the gossip of a grand gown and a horrible one together. It would raise too many questions. Living in secret has had its own great challenges, but Vivian has discovered over many years of her existence among humans that character covers up many ills. While she has not lived in this part of the world for quite some time, she knows this kind of people well enough, especially those from the city. And the Villiers party would be filled with the elite, and by extension, the most fashionable in the entire hemisphere. She simply cannot miss such an opportunity. Are you certain about this? Asks Mr. Pender, the clothier most recently employed by Vivian Dulac. He's a short, thin man with an even thinner mustache. He favors stripes and shiny buttons, and he generally doesn't argue with her. But Vivian already knows this is the point with which he's going to struggle. The colors are unusual, lavender and white and black fur, but he does not question. The accessories are unusual, raw mother of pearl and natural shapes instead of square facets, and all these Mr. Pender accepts with a smile. It is simply the length, or lack thereof, that takes Mr. Pender aback. Trust me, Vivian says, smoothing her hand across the top layer of her dress, a slightly darker shade of purple than the sheath below. In a year or two, it will be all the rage. But do you not think it slightly inappropriate? He asks with some difficulty. And then he adds, You don't think you'll be cold? Vivian, of course, remembers her earlier days, in particular her wooing of many a knight, and her favorite outfits comprised simply of strategically placed orchids. She smiles anyway, patting Mr. Pender on the shoulder. You forget the black and white fur capelet. It will do keep me more than warm. But the dress, your ankles. My ankles will be fine, sir. You needn't worry. Or are you so concerned for your reputation that you would give up the sum I've set aside for you? Vivian doesn't need to look at him. She feels his energy, feels his sensations and heat like moving webs all around them. It is an ancient dance, and many men have tried and failed to take lead. She will not kill Mr. Pender, not yet anyway, but she is strong enough still and wise enough now that she's able to twist his thoughts just so. He won't love her. She never could tolerate that sort of thing, but he will trust her, and that's halfway there. Mr. Pender looks to make an argument, but then all the fight goes out of him and he says no more. The rest of planning goes on without incident, and Mr. Pender is even amenable enough to finish the work on Nerissa's dress, which is nowhere near as beautiful, but just as short. When they finally arrive at the Drummings, the Villiers mansion, known locally as the Rookery, for the ever present ravens atop its spires, or droppings, due to the unfortunate side effect of the avian guests, the drive leading up to the front entrance is a mangle of broughams and carriages and frustrated valets. For the average partygoer, the weather is a horror. Wind and drizzle have made the affair both soggy and frigid, casting uncomely splashes of red and snot across many a fair face in attendance, men and women alike. To think all of that work dashed because of a cruel twist of climate. Nerissa and Vivian never have to worry about such inconveniences. For Nerissa's part, she can look however she wants, so long as she does not reveal her true face. For Vivian, she is always flawless. Her skin is not aged nor needs embellishment. Her dark hair and glassy eyes could not have been better shaped had they been carved in marble. Oh, look, it's Lady Olivier, Vivian says, peering out the window with a crooked smile. She's fallen into a puddle, and she's beating her footman about the head with her purse. And by the sound of it, she's got stashed the entirety of the family's jewels in it. The poor man. The way she giggles, however, reveals her true feelings on the matter. Nerissa fiddles with the sleeve of her dress. The whole contraption is ungodly uncomfortable. How is it that Vivian manages to find one horrid dress after another with levels of such mind bogglingly engineering for the sole purpose of tormenting her? Nerissa knows well enough that maintaining human form, any human form, is difficult as it is. One's original form does not simply vanish into the aether. It must be cleverly hidden and maintained over a long period of time. She still has extra arms and a long serpentine tail. It is only through her skill and concentration that she keeps them concealed. Sometimes I think you want me to lose my glamour, Nerissa says, pulling Vivian away from the window. And don't gawk. You'll draw attention. Of course I will. That's the whole idea, Vivian says, stifling a giggle. When they finally reach the entrance, it is quite clear that the poor Villiers have done a very poor job of planning for the weather. There are not enough servants to manage the thick coats. The marble steps are slick, and while some effort has been made to throw salt, it is still perilously slippery. Neither Vivian nor Nerissa have any trouble navigating, of course, but they make a show of looking as if they are in need of help to avoid raising any eyebrows. They have both learned to do this instinctively, a kind of chameleon act around humans. Nerissa prepares herself as they present their card to the footman. Even in the chaos, it is time for the ball to begin. In fact, well past time. The smell of rich food reaches Nerissa just as their names are called, and she takes a few deep breaths, hoping she can keep her wits together in the presence of so many frenzied human beings. She's rarely tempted these days to drink of them, but when they get excited and angry, she finds her tastes return in flashes. Vivian has no such difficulty nor such concern. The center of the space is her very element. Angry or happy or afraid, it matters little to her. Just being among the crush of the crowd infuses her with a glow she is otherwise lacking. Her stony features brighten, her hair shines brighter. She is prepared to make her entrance. The anticipation is almost overwhelming for her. As the heavy doors open, so thickly laden with holly, ivy, and juniper that for a moment it is as if she is walking into a hidden forest. Her heart races, her pulse beats inhumanly fast. The feeling is not nervousness. Her body is not built in a way to experience such human emotions, but it is the thrill of the hunt, the promise of satiety, that so pushes her forward. It is her favorite moment, when all eyes turn to her, when she, above all others, is held up as the ideal, a point of jealousy, a point of adulation, like a goddess of old. Except something happens, something wrong. When her name is called, it is called wrong, Lady Vivian Dulac. And then in the din, everyone is looking through her because they call another name louder, and everyone has hushed. They are not paying attention to her. Miss Christabel Crane, comes a booming voice. It seems that someone has found a megaphone. Vivian is unceremoniously ushered away. Nerissa separated her before she can object, but just long enough that she can glimpse the face and form of her foil. A small girl, barely into womanhood, but graced with every measure of loveliness treasured in this time. Long, pale curls piled upon her head with precise twists and turns, looking both refined and just tousled enough. Her face is sweet and her lips fresh, but the dress is truly the point of attention. Vivian knows with but the merest of glances that is from the hand of a familiar rival, Jeanne Paquin. Ah, still, the dress! It did not rely on any kind of trick or gimmick, for the dress, while not cut in any unusual way, looked as if it had been painted with albino peacocks. A living painting. The material shimmered through each and every feather, and as she walked past Vivian, it seemed that the birds moved their heads ever so slightly. And still, there is more. The dress is nearly half of the trouble. On the young woman's arm is none other than Vivian's old paramour, Worth Goodwin, the son of the questing beast himself. May she rest in peace. Perfect, brilliant Worth Goodwin, tall and clever, bright as the summer sun, both the opposite and complement to Vivian and her greatest folly. She stands confused, thinking him for dead for quite a while now. The last time Nerissa saw Worth Goodwin, it was 1850. He was to go off on an adventure to locate one of the exigents they were ever fighting, a kind of fey creature gone mad with evil and vice. Different from aberrants who are dangerous but less conscious, a minotaur to a bison, respectively. But that last time, over long cigarettes at the William Blake in London, it was as if they had not all shared a house together for 100 years, nor had they worked together to track down ancient artifacts with the power to destroy Britain and indeed most of the continent itself. Nerissa and Worth were a good team, a marvelous team, until Vivian fell in love with him, until the two of them began feeding off each other's powers and hating each other. It wasn't a good situation for either of them. Worth needed to be wanted, to be hunted, and Vivian needed to hunt. Both creatures woven of supernatural threads and should have been kept apart. Nerissa was worried that they would destroy one another, and with a world in such a supply of wondrous beings as they, she didn't exactly destroy their relationship, but she nudged it in the direction of utter annihilation, enthusiastically. She conspired with Worth to get him out of the country and assume his demise. It was easier that way for Vivian, who would continue to follow him if she knew the truth. Lying to the sylph was surprisingly easy to do once Nerissa got the hang of it. Besides, jealousy over their relationship was making her scales go flaky. Now, seeing the look on Vivian's face, however, Nerissa realizes that all her work was in vain. Vivian would always love Worth. The idea that she could have presented such a thing seemed utter folly now. How could she have ever thought that he had the power to prevent him from coming back? She thought they had an arrangement. There would be words. But then, no. Nerissa calms herself down. She can feel her skin going scaly, and losing her sense of her disguise would help absolutely no one. The panic subsides. Worth Goodwin is with another woman, and by the way she is casting loving glances at him, he is no simple escort. Does the young girl have any idea how old he is? Likely not. Human is perhaps his most favored form, but a glissant, he can be any animal he wants. Nerissa is generally limited to the humanesque, though once she managed a satyr, it is as uncomfortable as one might imagine. Now, Vivian. Yes, she is not happy. She is frozen. Nerissa must rein in her glee, must compose herself, because while it is terrible to see Worth Goodwin, it is not terrible to see him with another woman. It is, in fact, delightful. unless it inspires Vivian to go into a blood soaked frenzy. But it's been at least 100 years since that, so. Vivian, Nerissa whispers, taking her friend by the arm. She is frigid to the touch, all the warmth and vitality of the event draining from her upon seeing Worth. Let us go and see what sort of canapes they have over there. I'm told the vol de vente are amazing. I want to go home, Vivian says, and begins to sink toward the front door. She does not look at Nerissa. She does not seem capable of getting her eyes away from Worth. He's just a silly creature, Nerissa says, hesitant to use the word man since it is far from an accurate description. They are close enough that such words will not get caught by those around them. Let him to his whatever it is he's working on. But I thought he was dead in Brazil, Vivian says dreamily. Nerissa winces, and that is more or less what she told Vivian, and more or less a fabrication. Their sundering was a long time ago, and the details a bit fuzzy, and Nerissa may have expanded on some details a little beyond the realm of the factual. The truth is, she knew Worth was miserable, but she was tired of hunting aberrants. So she stole Vivian's ledger, a remarkable book containing the details of the work of Waldemar and Goodwin, meticulously illustrated and annotated, and sent it off with Worth in exchange for his freedom. He did go to Brazil, at least briefly. I thought the same thing, died hunting orchids, and, Nerissa says hurriedly, oh, look, it's, Mrs. Bodinger. Nerissa tries, but she really has no capacity or desire to know the names of the elite of Tarrytown and New York City proper. They are but spirits on a similar course, but brief interruptions. Rockefeller, Nerissa hisses, and at last this gets Vivian's attention, and the attention of almost everyone around them. The impropriety is at last enough to cause Vivian to turn on her friend, grab her by the arm, and escort her away from Christabel Crane, whomever she may be, and toward the canapes. Once, Worth. Once upon a time, Worth. Once upon a time, Worth and Vivian, together, entwined, strangers to the world, supernatural beings of curious heavenly form, they were happy and furious and constantly rutting, to say nothing of all the arguing, though that was part of the fashion too. But Vivian doesn't remember the last part in that moment. When she beholds Worth Goodwin for the first time in nearly a century, her thoughts aren't of the fights, the trysts, the jealousy, the lies. They are instead full to bursting with reminiscences of certain smells, olfactory being one of her strongest suits and most connected to her memories, redolent of coupling and frolicking and general mischief making. Worth always brought out the devious side of her, and she in him. The sense of elation lasts just for a short jolt of time. As mentioned before, Vivian is not human. She does not experience emotion or indeed time in the same way as a human. Her emotions are layers, and often she gets tied up in one or another. It is difficult for her to feel her way through the layers once she has ventured down into them. And once she understands that Worth Goodwin is not simply attending to Christabel Crane, whoever she may be, she descends quickly into cold madness. Jealousy is a guaranteed venture into the deepest chill of her soul. This is the state Nerissa calls permafrost, and it's a helpful state for Vivian, at least from a purely defensive standpoint. She becomes nigh impervious to the slings and arrows of the world about her. Her body temperature drops, her movements slow. She is no less lovely, but much more deadly. Those human ish components of her body diminish significantly, and her ability to make calculations where human life is concerned goes along with them, which rarely ends well for anyone, let alone Vivian herself. Which is why Nerissa is essential to her overhaul reformation. The good years have been consistent with her around. The Lamia is even less humanish than Vivian, and yet she has a great deal more intuition about her. Perhaps, Vivian wonders in one of her deep down layers, it's because she doesn't feed off people in the same way. She doesn't know them immediately, feel them about her like a pressing wave. She has to reach out to read the signals. Vivian, listen to me, please, Nerissa is saying at her. Vivian discovers she is now sitting upon a gaudy settee in a rather dark room. There is a window open somewhere, and she can hear the rain pattering on the roof. It smells of stale old people and musty clothing, and she'd rather not be in such a place. But it is the sort of location Nerissa always seeks out, the dark and the dank. I listen to you far too much, if you ask me, Vivian replies, batting at her friend. You told me he was dead. Nerissa takes a deep breath and backs away, her scales shimmering for a moment before they're hidden beneath layers of her glamour again. Vivian thinks it's a shame, though she's never mentioned it because she's quite lovely when she's in her natural form. But that would be unwelcome. Nerissa has told her time and again over the many long years of their friendship that her natural state is abhorrent, and telling her otherwise would just be confusing. Most likely dead, she says in a reply to Vivian. I loved him. You were bad for each other. But so delicious, Vivian sighs. He didn't even look at me. I don't know what to say to him. Well, you best consider. You almost caused a scene, you know. Mrs. Yarborough nearly passed out when she touched you. You could have taken down half the party with your antics. Antics? Laughs Vivian, the bitter edge to her voice like a cold knife. You can't honestly tell me that. He's just. That's it. You've been in a state for an hour, Nerissa says. An hour! After all this work for this ridiculous party, you freeze up, and I have to half drag you up the stairs. I am in disarray, but I have composed myself, Vivian replies, brushing her hair with her fingers, preparing to re enter the fray. She must steel herself. If Worth sees her in such a weak state, he will assume her frail and pining, and while that may be true in the realest sense when it comes to him, it cannot be. She must be better. Because I took care of things. Why? Nerissa pauses a second, giving Vivian the look of disappointment before saying, because that's what I always do. Oh, come now. You act as if these things happen all the time. You know very well I've been on very good behavior since Worth. Yes, that's what frightens me. It looks like he's got his hands full as it is, and Vivian feels him before she sees him. She always does. The huntress knows her prey, even when she's been wronged. She smells him, tastes the words on his tongue before he utters them in the doorway. She's only surprised she didn't sense him earlier. He enters the room, and with him comes the smell of the deep forest, of home, copper and dirt and growing things, wet fur and 1,000 memories at once. He is so handsome, down to his very essence, and Vivian wants nothing more than to surround herself in him once again. But his look is cold, focused more on the Lamia than herself. How can one cause physical pain with a glance? It's most unfair. Regardless of what it might look like, I am here to see you, says Worth. Both of you. It's been a long while. Worth is limned in dull light from behind, his dark hair cast slightly auburn. It is a familiar face he's wearing now, much like the one Vivian met when they were first introduced. The one he wore when he and Nerissa were in business together, if it can be called such a thing. Valdemar and Goodwin, monster hunters. For a while, it was an interesting collaboration, and she did enjoy working on the ledger of their adventures and finding an outlet for her alchemical hobbies, but Nerissa hisses, the sound echoing off the walls of the room, breaking her thoughts. What would one call this place? A foyer? A closet? Some anteroom to the balcony, perhaps? Whatever container she's been put in, Vivian is momentarily taken aback by the sound her friend makes. It's a sound she has not heard in a very long time, and it reminds her of tastier meals in the canapes at tonight's festivities. Vivian doesn't have time to process her surroundings further, nor does she concern herself with memories of bygone days, because seeing Worth this close throws her down to more layers of emotion, not yet the permafrost, but to a crackling tundra just above it. That's hard to believe, says Nerissa. You look like you've got your hands quite full. I assure you my intent is pure, Worth says, looking genuinely hurt. Pitiful creature, but too damned handsome for his own good. But where are my manners? It's been quite some time since we've seen one another, and I was under the impression that you two were off to take a significantly less visible existence. Whoever told you that? Asked Vivian, finding her voice, though it is a little less meeker than she'd like. Circumspection and gossip. You know I never like being out of the limelight, except when you're wanted for murder, Worth points out. That was a long time ago, and not the entire story, Nerissa interrupts. And for the most part, you are right. We have been keeping a low profile, inasmuch as we have not been working in the same capacity as we did once, when you were part of my business. Your business? Asked Vivian. This is a strange way of saying things, but she senses that yet again, Nerissa is playing some invisible territory game with Worth. They were ever at each other's throats before, but to say that the business was Nerissa's alone is quite a blow. To both of them, Vivian was essential to keeping them funded, so helping the access into the strange and the arcane. She might not have accompanied them on every mission, but that is precisely why I came here. Well, one of the hard rumors is a pair of women that met your descriptions taking up residence at Lyndhurst. I haven't been in New York long, you see, but my friend, Miss Crane, has a request to make of you, and I promised to make introductions, Worth said, taking a tentative step forward. Miss Crane can ask us herself, Nerissa says. Oh, yes, she will, says Worth, but I first wanted to prepare you, of course, for the matter at hand. There is a detail of rather immense importance. Where have you been? Asks Vivian, the words coming out of her mouth before she can stop them. She is bobbing between the permafrost and the frozen tundra, then down to the fire at her core. He isn't even looking at her. He's addressing Nerissa. He's half ignoring her. What madness is this? Who is this Mrs. Crane? Asked the Lamia. Your new paramour? She's no lemon, says Worth. That's what I needed to explain. I have to tell you how I got here, how I found you, and why did you leave? Vivian asks, her voice high and pining. Why did you leave in the first place? Did I make you so miserable? There would be time to answer this question, Vivian knows, if the world were a fair place. But she's a supernatural being, one whom even the earth does not seem to understand. From below them, in the main hall, there is a sound like gunfire, but lower. It reverberates, causes Vivian's ears to ache. It reminds her of their bygone days when Worth and Nerissa would sometimes take their work home, or else they traveled pathways between the Fae and the Grey, what they called the world of mortals. Worth curses lowly. Prepare yourself, he says. They may have deep pockets, but their wits are shallow. He takes Vivian's arm, his hands warm through his gloves, the energy of him flowing freely into her so perfectly and completely she almost cries out. I'm perfectly capable of defending myself, Vivian says, making no attempt to free herself of his touch. Please, what is happening? Something bad is all the Glattisant offers. Please, you must focus. You must not kill them. He looks pointedly at Nerissa. No promises, Lamia replies smoothly. Nerissa, please, Vivian says curtly. Except she knows Nerissa cannot focus well in a frenzy. Too much blood, and there would be no controlling her, no matter how reformed. Worth grits his teeth and gazes at Vivian, deep circles like bruises under his arms. The look the look in his eyes is sharp, concerned. People downstairs are panicking. The walls of the rookery shudder again. But then there is something else, something darker. Vivian senses it has been here the whole time, but with the shock of what happened in the room, it has slipped away. Something shifts, slides away into the night, a dark creature moving below with speed and power. Vivian feels its negative presence, sucking in the energy she's claimed as her own. What is this? She muses half to herself. You felt it, Worth asks, blanching. It's leaving. It's gone, Vivian breathes, shaking her head to dispel it like a bad dream. I didn't realize the danger we were in until it had left. Worth looks visibly relieved, but then he winces. They're coming. Brace yourselves. They do not know how to behave. Do you remember how to fight? Nerissa asks Worth from across the room. Clearly, she's come prepared because she's carrying that silly silver knife she always manages to sneak on her person, as if she needs a weapon. She's a living tool of destruction. And lies, it appears, considering her present company. Lies and knives are nearly the same thing. Worth nods, but Vivian senses he's nervous. That could be the echoes from below. Servants are running every which way, platters falling into the ground. The walls shake again, sending plaster and dust into her hair and across the shoulders of her gown. This is enough to send her to action, and with Nerissa in the lead, she follows along into the breach. And that's it for tonight. Thank you for tuning in, and we will continue with the next chapter, Ouroboros, in a couple of days. Thanks so much. Bye.